Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for 8,000 subscribers. So today I'm trying out a new concept. I called it Location Spotlight, and I'm gonna be talking very briefly about a certain region or location's history. In this video, Easter Island, also known in the native language as Rapa Nui. Today, the island is a part of Chile, but this wasn't always the case. Easter Island is one of the most remote places on the planet. It's located in the South Pacific, over 2,000 miles from South America and 4,000 miles from New Zealand. It's also one of the least inhabited locations on Earth. Its land forms a triangle of extinct volcanoes with about 180 square kilometers. What's interesting is, despite being extremely isolated, it is firmly implanted with Polynesian culture. The Polynesians were a reasonably developed civilization, which goes back as early as the Stone Age. They populated up to the 18th century the thousands of islands between the Easter Island, New Zealand, and Hawaii, considered the three corners of Polynesia. Polynesians were an incredibly adventurous people. The first European colonizers couldn't believe that a people who didn't know how to read could have colonized such a large portion of the world, 38 archipelagos and a lot of islands. These European colonizers tried denying the existence of a common civilization, but the languages, culture, and institutions in regions like Hawaii, New Zealand, and the Easter Island are too similar to be a coincidence in such distant places. However, it's still a bit of a mystery how the Polynesians were able to find the Easter Island, which is over 1,100 sea miles away from their nearest populated region at the time. They were either incredibly skilled navigators, incredibly lucky, or a lot of them must have died until some were fortunate enough to find the island. The Polynesian society had a theocratic structure. The chiefs were seen as descendants of the gods and held the title of supreme priests. They mediated between God and man through their mediation power, which they also called mana. This granted them sacred rights over whichever land, sea, or products they wished, and this right was called tapu. Tapu and mana, and the respect that the locals had for them, made sure that Polynesian societies were peaceful and stable. But in troubled times, warriors from the various clans which descended from the chiefs broke the tapu and fought for resources without caring about the traditions. And this caused severe trouble and unbalance in society, which was what happened with the Easter Island, but we're gonna get to that in a second. The Easter Island is projected to have been settled around the year 700 by an expedition of only 2 canoes. Skeletal and linguistical evidence show that the Easter Islanders were close relatives to the Mangarevans, so that's probably where the first settlers came from. The Polynesians brought with them food to grow, like sweet potato, bananas, and sugar canes. They cleared the land below the 3 hills on the volcanoes and they settled, beginning to fish, hunt, and grow crops. According to predictions, their population never surpassed a few thousand people, but still they were able to carve and build over 1,000 giant statues out of volcanic rock, which were around 5 times the size of an average human. These statues represented the mana, embodying the power granted to the chiefs by the gods. There's usually a lot of mysticism about how the statues got there, but from what I could find, this is a perfectly logical explanation. The locals built them. In the 16th century, they finally invented a form of writing, which was used by priests to memorize traditions and family trees. Until this point, most records were kept by oral tradition, and this was the highest peak of a time of prosperity in the Easter Island. But then something went wrong. The growing of the population meant the straining of resources. The island environment started showing signs of overexploration. Too much of the forest was cut down, and this caused a chain of events which led to less crop production. The reason why the trees didn't grow back is attributed to the Polynesian rat, which was very common among Polynesian islands in the Pacific. They ate the nuts of the local palm trees, and this prevented regrowth and contributed to the complete deforestation of the island. Less trees grew, so they couldn't build canoes, and that meant that they couldn't fish. It's projected that the last forest was cut down by around 1640 and that by 1700 the flora of the island was completely gone. Other islands in Polynesia solved the problem of overpopulation with options like primitive ways of birth control, infanticide, or even stimulating migration to other islands. But at this point, in around 1500, Easter Island was already isolated from the rest of Polynesia, so contact with their cultural brothers was pretty much non-existent. Maybe they closed themselves off because of the rats, since these were only transported through human migrations, but this is just speculation. Not resorting to these alternatives for population control caused violence to begin. They even invented a special spear called the mata, an obsidian-tipped spear, which was very efficient for war. The clansmen of the island split into two factions, which started constantly fighting with each other over the resources, breaking the mentioned tapu. Their supreme leader, which was the heir of the island's founder, was left with essentially no power and no way to keep the peace. His mana was no longer respected by the population. The two factions ruled separate parts of the island. The west and the north was ruled by the Tu, and the south and the east belonged to the Otu Itu. This violence led to the destruction of most of the giant statues, either by one armed group trying to provoke the other or by the unhappy population as a sign of protest. A new religion emerged, which changed the balance of power. Essentially, the warrior class took over and destroyed the Easter Island society. The few surviving people fled from their burned homes, and a lot of them started living in underground refuges. Finally, a Dutch sailor arrived at the island on the 5th of April, which was Easter Sunday, in 1722, giving it the name of Easter Island. So after the Dutch came the Spanish and a little later the French. In 1770, a period of statue toppling called Huri Moai started. This was an attempt by the competing clans to destroy the socio-spiritual power, the mentioned mana, represented by the statues, making sure to break them in the fall to ensure that they were dead and without any power. So the self-destruction of the island was already in progress when the Europeans arrived, but they still played a helping hand in speeding it along by enslaving a lot of the locals and bringing diseases. In 1877, the previous over 7,000 people of a thriving society became few over 100 who could barely remember those great times. So this descendant time of the island is marked by self-destruction, war, lack of resources, slavery, cannibalism, amongst many others. Today, the island is part of Chile, who annexed it in 1888. It has a population of around 7,000 people, and around 60% are descendant of the Aboriginal Rapa Nui. So, in a way, the island sort of came back from its low point, but a lot of the Polynesian culture was lost in the process. And that is a very short history of the Easter Island, a good example of how overpopulation and overusage of resources can lead to war, and consequently the self-destruction of a previously thriving society and culture. Thank you so much for watching the video. Make sure to leave a comment with your opinion or corrections, and subscribe if you want to catch future videos. I will see you next time.